thank you for the invitation to speak here today. Very important event. Basically what I'm going to try to do in the next 10-15 minutes is to sort of illustrate what the cabinet member here has already mentioned in what are we really trying to do in the framework programs in terms of cancer research. I will very briefly go over FP6, spend more time on FP7, and then end with some mentioning of clinical trial issues, which is a hugely important issue that I think was going to be even more important because we are moving more and more into clinical research. So it's becoming a huge stumbling block. So may I have the next slide, Jan? So this is just to remind you that we work on the basis of the ERA, or the European Research Area, basically a common market. And again, the whole idea is to do things together, to put instruments, if you wish, initiatives in place that enable us also in cancer to move forward. Can I have the next slide? So the area I work in this Directorate F, Health Directorate, is basically we have three big themes or pillars. And if I have the next slide, please. Cancer is in the pillar called Translational Research for Health. This directorate or department of about 120 people has about 6 billion euros to spend on health research. In cancer, as you see, we do that focusing. Next slide, please. We do that by focusing on a number of areas. So we at least try to aim to have translation in all our projects. So cancer was actually one of the first areas in FP6 to move really towards much more translation. So we look into novel cancer prevention strategies. So we have projects that tackle early detection, that look at screening. We have more and more, and you must have noticed this in FP7 in the calls, and you'll see also calls in the future. There is more and more clinical research in terms of therapies, patient care, but also going straight into funding clinical trials, and particularly the investigator-driven ones. We try to, of course, through our projects, to structure certain areas because it's a cliche, but it's true that a lot of the areas are at least fragmented and do not really seem to communicate very well. And of course, in the long term, we really try, at least, that we can contribute to improving treatment efficacy. This is not only survival, as was mentioned before. Very important is the quality of life. We are very well aware of the side effects, the long-term side effects. So this is, with cancer becoming, at least for some cancers where things go well, cancer becoming a chronic disease, the long-term side effects can be really tremendous. So also we try to work on improving etiology of cancer. This means that, how well do you understand cancer? For example, pancreatic cancer. We have no clue how this cancer starts, how it progresses. It's completely resistant to anything you try. So we also try to work on reducing cancer incidence and mortality through these projects, through the outcomes of these projects. And I will show that in a minute. We, together with DG Sanko, we will, we do things to improve coordination, to have better communication, at least to initiate these efforts. And of course, we try to think of other strategic efforts that we might need. So next slide, please. So FP6, very briefly, there was a massive involvement, I think I can say, of scientists and clinicians in more than 100 projects. I have no time to go over this, but basically half of this money went into, and is still going into, because these projects are still running, many of them, into better understanding the underlying mechanisms of cancer. So very early translation research, and in some extent clinical trials, clinical research was also funded. Can I have next slide, please? So in FP7, this is just a brief overview, a schematic of our calls and what we have covered so far. And of course, I know that it's not sufficient, but this was already mentioned by Dr. Tambuys and by other people. The fact is that we have, the Commission is managing only 5% of total research funding available, and therefore we have to make choices, clear priorities. You can see also that sometimes cancer is not open in our annual calls, like other diseases that we tackle, like chronic diseases, like diabetes, are sometimes not open for funding, simply because the funding is limited, and we have to maximize our efforts to increase the impact. So basically, in FP7 we have covered a number of issues that I think are very important for patients. For example, end-of-life care. This is something that's completely under-researched. So we have several projects running in that area, simply trying to understand what are these issues, how can we deal with them, are there biomarkers for patients in the last weeks of life, how to deal with depression, how to deal with cachexia, etc., etc. But we also, and I just wanted to show this, that we do now try to cover in a more systematic way poor prognosis cancers, for the reason that despite millions of euros and dollars that have gone into cancer research, these cancers, lung cancer number one, but then pancreatic cancer, stomach cancer, and ovary cancer, and others, we don't make any progress, or at least very little. It's incredible to see the survival figures that do not seem to change for these cancers. Can I have the next slide? So, since I have only little time, I decided to focus a bit more on what we do in terms of creating networks that are going to be there for a long time to come. We call them networks of excellence. They are one of the few funding schemes that we work with. And basically, these networks, beyond doing research in a collaborative effort, so together between scientists in different countries, they also aim at long-term sustainability. They aim at long-term integration. They aim at setting up common schemes, be it through common training, education, or exchange of equipment, but it certainly also involves common knowledge management, for example, IPR, an important issue. How they do this? Well, basically, it's by coordinating, specific areas in research like leukemia, breast cancer, melanoma, etc. They try to set up joint education or training schemes. This turns out to be difficult because of different national legislation. They try to at least build sort of infrastructures, facilities that can be used and shared between all these institutions. Can I have the next slide, please? This picture is, of course, it's just trying to show that when you put these building blocks together, you can sort of help in terms of coordinating cancer research. But this picture, of course, is just more or less an illustration, and is far from complete. It just shows a number of networks of excellence that are there and doing a lot of good work. Most of them have patients groups involved. And the ones that are here, except the one that's called EMIL, which was a huge network on cancer imaging, where I think Europe is really ahead of the United States, is the interesting issues in all these networks is that they seem to be very well in coordinated clinical research. For example, there are two that's called Conticanet, Eurobanet. They are the networks now on rare cancers. And they are now working in a way that they, hopefully in a year or two, are going to merge their activities, come with, for example, a common journal, come with a common strategic agenda to engage also industry. I know that, for example, Novartis is involved in these strategic issues, etc., etc. But I also put in something that we call ERA-nets, because, as was mentioned already by other people in the room, that the coordination of the funding, I think the funding actually is sort of a jungle, because it's completely uncoordinated. So there is a lot of cancer research funding available. We know this. We know this especially from studies that mentioned by McVie, from Sullivan and Eckhouse. We know that the funding is available. We know also that we have hundreds of different funding schemes, and they all do their own agenda, their own priorities, which for a good reason they do. But if you put this together and you focus on, well, call it grand challenges or priorities, we might be more effective. So in that sense, ERA-nets are trying to do this. So despite of the national priorities and legislations, priorities of the ministries in the different countries, they try to put countries together, the ministries and program managers, and creating a common pot of research and fund key priorities from these common pots. These are called ERANETs, and we are negotiating one that's called TransCan that is going to focus on translational research in Europe. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is just an example of a network called TransBig, Network of Excellence. They are coming with this MINDAC trial. I don't have time to go into it, but the idea is very simple. Come with a prognostic marker that saves at least 10 to 15% of breast cancer patients the unnecessary treatment with chemotherapy, which would be a tremendous advantage because chemotherapy has a lot of side effects, as you know. Next slide, please. Another example is LeukemiaNet. This is a huge network. I think a lot of people in the beginning thought that it would be too big to be effective, but it is amazing the coordination that has been demonstrated in this network of over 1,000 people. When I go to the meetings of this network, I have the impression to be in a conference. If you just look at the number of trials that they together plan, design, and execute in ALL, for example, is over 70. Another interesting thing is that in terms of innovation is that these networks, they also help move forward the agenda on clinical trials regulation. I know they gave a lot of input on this recent public consultation, but the other thing they do is they come with guidelines. What are the best treatment schemes for patients, also in terms of quality of life? And these guidelines in terms of leukemia, they have now been published, and they are being implemented not only in Europe, but I know also Australia, United States. So this network is really making a change in this area. Next. For example, recommendations, and this is just a small example of a long list of guidelines that they have published and that are being implemented. I mean, it's nice that people publish, but more interesting is that these guidelines are considered to be very valuable. Next example. So in our program, as you have understood, we try to create critical mass in terms of collaborative research and with projects which can be small, medium or large, but we also try to work on at least reinforcing coordination efforts between different stakeholders in Europe through different schemes. Can I have the next slide, please? And this is, I think, an early example in FP5. This was already through the initiative of the Parliament and the then Commissioner Busquin. So an FP5 project, ECRM, or the European Cancer Research Manager Forum, they looked into research funding, and as I explained, the conclusion was that there is tremendous fragmentation. Then more recent, and I will stop with this, is the Commission, the Partnership Against Cancer, which was is the driving force is DG Sanko, and this partnership started, 2009. We are waiting for the outcome of the evaluation and to get everything ready to start. So one of the four major goals in this coordination is where, by the way, it seems all important stakeholders get now together, is to coordinate about 1/3 of total research funds available. So this is a tremendous task, and we have to see if we manage this. So I will stop here, and thank you.